For 3 years, my ideas fueled our department's success. The Synergy Initiative? Mine. The rebrand that won the Clio? My late-night sketches. Every time my boss Martin would present them as our team's effort, then his strategic direction. My name was a footnote. When I confronted him, he smiled. That's what leadership is, Claire. You're a great executor. The final straw was seeing my prototype, the one that saved the failing Veritas account, presented to the CEO as Martin's breakthrough. I didn't quit in rage. I smiled back. I began a meticulous, 18-month campaign of perfectly legal corporate judo. His resignation was just the opening act. Hello. Welcome to Hurt Stories. Let me tell you about the ecology of a modern corporation. On the surface, it's a flowchart. Clear lines, defined roles, a hierarchy that promises order. But beneath that org chart is a murky, complex swamp of influence, credit, and predation. For 15 years at Lumina Systems, I was a senior strategist. I wasn't in the C-suite, but I was what they called a keystone employee. The ideas flowed through me. I understood the market, the clients, the unspoken gaps between what we sold and what we actually delivered. I was good at my job. I loved the craft of it, the puzzle of a client's need, the elegant solution. My mistake was believing that craft, that excellence, was the currency that mattered most. My boss, Martin Vale, was Vice President of Strategic Development. He was a man crafted from LinkedIn platitudes and expensive but ill-fitting suits. He spoke in a barrage of buzzwords, leveraging synergies, optimizing paradigm shifts, deep diving into the granularity. It was verbal fog designed to sound impressive while saying nothing. But he had one genius-level skill. He was a credit vampire. He had an almost preternatural ability to sense when an idea had matured from risky concept to inevitable success, and at that precise moment, he would attach himself to it, like a remora to a shark, and swim it up to the executive suite. For 3 years, I was his shark. And I didn't even realize I was bleeding. It started subtly. I'd send him a detailed memo outlining a new approach to client retention. He'd reply, "Great thoughts here, Claire. Let me socialize this with the leadership team and frame it up." The next thing I'd hear in a department-wide meeting was Martin saying, "Building on some of the concepts we've been developing in my working group, the direction I want to push is," and there would be my memo verbatim, delivered without my name attached. I'd get a private, "Great work on supporting that, really fleshed it out." I told myself it was fine. The idea was being implemented. That was what mattered. But the scale escalated. The Synergy Initiative, a complete overhaul of our cross-departmental workflows that took me 6 months of painstaking analysis and diplomacy, presented to the board as Martin's integrative operational model. The rebrand for our flagship product, the one that involved my spending a week sleeping under my desk with the design team, the one that won the industry's top award? At the gala, Martin held the Clio statue and thanked his incredibly supportive team. I was one of 20 people in a blurry background photo. Each time, a little piece of my professional soul would calcify. I'd complain to my husband, David. He did it again. David, a high school teacher whose world revolved around clear attribution and grading fairness, was horrified. You have to say something. But in the corporate swamp, saying something is the quickest way to be labeled difficult, not a team player, lacking in leadership mindset. I was a 47-year-old woman in tech-adjacent consulting. I knew the stereotypes. If I got angry, I was emotional. If I demanded credit, I was selfish. Martin's entire power structure was built on the unspoken compliance of people like me. The turning point was the Veritas account. Veritas was a legacy client, bleeding money, ready to walk. The relationship was toxic, the deliverables a mess. Martin, fearing the loss of a marquee name, dumped the problem in my lap. Fix it, Claire. You're our miracle worker. It was a poison chalice. If I failed, it would be my failure. If I succeeded, well, we knew the pattern. I immersed myself. I audited 2 years of communications, conducted secret interviews with disgruntled Veritas mid-managers, and diagnosed the core issue. We were selling them a Ferrari when they needed a reliable, custom-built tractor. My solution was a complete pivot, a modest, modular software package that would solve their actual, unsexy problems, paired with a transparent partnership model. I built a working prototype in my home office nights and weekends. It was ugly but functional. It worked. I presented it to Martin in a private briefing. I showed him the data, the prototype, the phased implementation plan. His eyes, usually glazed with self-interest, lit up with pure predatory glee. He saw it. He saw the save. This is excellent, Claire. Really top-tier support work. Let me take this to the Veritas Steering Committee and own the presentation. It needs the weight of my title behind it. A week later, I was invited, as a supporting resource, to the quarterly CEO update meeting. Martin was presenting departmental wins. Up on the massive screen, in a slick PowerPoint deck I'd never seen, was my Veritas solution. My diagrams, my data points, my phased approach. The title slide read, Veritas Turnaround, a new strategic framework from Martin Vale. He spoke for 20 minutes. He used phrases I'd written in my brief. He described the prototype development he had spearheaded. The CEO, a woman I respected, nodded vigorously. Martin, this is exactly the kind of proactive, visionary leadership we need. This is how you save a client. I sat in the back of the dark room. My hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. The heat of a lifetime of swallowed injustices rose in my chest. This wasn't a footnote. This was a full book plagiarism of my effort, my insight, my salvation of his failing responsibility. After the meeting, he caught me in the hall. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. See, Claire? When you execute well on leadership's vision, we all win. The smile he gave me was not one of gratitude, but of domination. It said, I own you and your output. In that moment, something in me broke. But it wasn't my spirit. It was my last shred of belief in playing by the gentle person's rules. Rage, I realized, was a useless, fleeting fire. What I needed was the cold, enduring patience of a glacier, slow, deliberate, and capable of grinding mountains to dust. I didn't quit. Quitting would have given him my client-saving win, and my position. It would have been a gift. I didn't have a screaming match in HR. That would have been a he said, she said that I'd lose. No. I smiled back. A thin, cool smile. Of course, Martin. Always happy to execute on the vision. My revenge would not be emotional. It would be architectural. It would be the systematic dismantling of his credibility, using the very tools of the corporate world he pretended to master. Metrics, optics, and precedent. It would be legal, it would be by the book, and it would be brutal. Phase 1. Documentation and disengagement. I became an archivist of my own work. Every idea, every sketch, every line of code in a prototype, every strategic memo was now first documented in an email to myself, time-stamped on a secure personal server. I created a digital paper trail a mile wide. I also began a process of structured disengagement. I stopped generating new, big-picture ideas in areas he could access. When he asked for brainstorming, I'd give him competent, incremental thoughts, nothing groundbreaking. The golden goose, as far as he was concerned, had stopped laying golden eggs. I poured my real creativity into something else. Understanding the company's vulnerabilities. Phase 2. The silent misdirection. Martin's greatest weakness was his hunger for executive approval. He was a yes man who promised the moon without consulting the engineers. I started very carefully, to feed that hunger with poison bait. In one-on-one meetings, I'd pose a challenge as an opportunity. You know, Martin, the CEO is always talking about innovation in the Asian market. I did some cursory research on regulatory hurdles there. It's a minefield. Probably too complex for us right now. I'd leave a few dense, discouraging reports on the topic accidentally in my digital trash, which I knew his assistant monitored for him. Within a week, he'd be in the CEO's office, boldly proclaiming we were going to crack the Asian market by Q3, citing preliminary data that showed it was ripe. He had no plan, no team, no understanding of the minefield. I'd just sit back and watch him commit to an impossible, public deliverable. Phase 3. Building a shadow network. I stopped seeing my colleagues as Martin's team and started seeing them as potential allies in a silent coup. I had credibility where he had none, on the ground in the details. I began having quiet coffees with the lead developers, the senior accountants, the client relationship managers. I listened to their frustrations with Martin's grand, unsupported pronouncements. I didn't badmouth him. I simply validated their expertise. You're right, that timeline is impossible given the codebase. If only leadership understood the constraints. I became the trusted translator between the doers and the incompetent visionary. This network became my eyes, ears, and when the time came, my unified front. Phase 4. The trap. The Asian market initiative was floundering, as I knew it would. Clients were complaining about the neglected Veritas model, which Martin had now taken full ownership of but lacked the depth to manage. The CEO was getting anxious. This was my moment. I requested a career pathing discussion with the CEO, Cynthia. I framed it as seeking mentorship. In that meeting, I was the picture of loyal concern. I'm so passionate about Lumina, Cynthia. I just worry sometimes we're overpromising. Like the Veritas model. It's so innovative, but the core architecture is delicate. Martin is such a big picture guy. I fear the operational details are getting lost. If it fails because of a technical oversight, it would reflect so poorly on his leadership and on the company. I didn't claim the idea. I expressed worry for his success. Cynthia, no fool, heard the subtext. The thing saving your big client is fragile, and the man taking credit for it doesn't understand how it works. A week later, during a high-stakes client call with Veritas, Martin was floundering. The client asked a detailed, technical question about data integration. He blustered. I, on the call as a subject matter expert, waited for a painful, silent beat, then answered with calm, flawless clarity. The Veritas CEO said, "Thank you, Claire. It's good to talk to someone who actually built the thing." The silence on our end was seismic. The final move. The choice. I didn't go to HR. I went to legal. I scheduled a meeting with the general counsel, a stern woman named Patricia. I brought my archive. Not as an accusation, but as a risk assessment. "Patricia," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I have a concern about intellectual property and liability. Over the last 3 years, a significant portion of my work product, strategic documents, prototype code, client solutions, has been presented publicly and to the board as the sole work of Martin Vale. I have the originating documentation here, time-stamped. My concern is twofold. First, if any of this IP is ever contested by a client or another firm, our legal standing is compromised because the chain of authorship is obfuscated internally. Second, if I were to leave Lumina and a competitor were to ask about my portfolio, I could not legally claim this work, which constitutes the bulk of my professional output here, creating a potential incentive for me to overshare to prove my capabilities elsewhere. I wasn't threatening to sue. I was outlining a corporate risk, a risk of IP theft, liability, and talent attrition. I was speaking her language. Patricia's face was a marble mask. "I see. The investigation was quiet, internal, and merciless. They audited email servers, project management tools, version histories on shared drives. My documentation was flawless. Martin's was non-existent. He was called in. He tried his buzzwords. They asked him to explain the core algorithm of the Veritas prototype. He couldn't. They didn't fire him for stealing my work. That's messy. They fired him for gross incompetence and misrepresentation of strategic capabilities, a direct threat to client relationships and company viability. His resignation was accepted immediately as a face-saving measure. But my revenge wasn't complete. His resignation was the opening act. The brutal coda. As part of his severance, he was required to sign a non-disparagement agreement. I was required to sign a release of claims. My lawyer, whom I'd quietly retained, negotiated mine. My release was conditional on one thing: a formal internal company-wide communication from the CEO regarding the Veritas project win and the Clio Award. The memo, which went to every employee, listed the key contributors by name. For the Veritas turnaround, spearheaded by Claire Evans, with support from the strategic team. For the Clio winning rebrand, creative direction by Claire Evans and the design team. It was a correction of the historical record. It was my name, etched officially into the company's history, replacing his. It was a quiet, legal, permanent discrediting. On his last day, Martin cleaned out his office. He looked deflated, a suit with no air inside. He didn't look at me. I didn't gloat. I sat at my desk, working. The final brutal twist was that I was offered his job. I turned it down. I didn't want to be vice president of strategic development. I used the event to negotiate a new role. Head of intellectual property and innovation strategy, reporting directly to Cynthia, with a mandate to create a system that documented and protected creative contribution. I built the process that would ensure no one else would have to fight the battle I did. My revenge was legal. It used corporate policy against its abuser. It was brutal because it didn't just remove him. It systematically exposed the hollow man behind the stolen trophies and replaced his false narrative with an unassailable truth. It transformed me from a victim of the swamp's ecology into its master. He took credit for my work to build his fake castle. I used the foundations of that castle to bury him. And then I built a better city on top. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more story like this, please like the video and subscribe the channel. Hit the bell icon to get notified.